Okay, Tori, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to
Great,
be here.
great, great. Well, glad to have you. So, let's start at the beginning. You're CTO and co-founder of Leaf, right? Fintech services, right? And tell us what that is. But then I'd like to get more into the backstory a little bit. But just like give us the cliche elevator pitch of what your company is
Sure.
and what its purpose is.
Happy to. Yeah, so Leaf Global Fintech is a digital wallet that was built for refugees and migrants to help them store and transport money across borders. Doesn't even require a smartphone to work. It's currently live in East Africa and Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda. And with that, really anybody can store their money over time, send and receive with anybody on the Leaf system for free. They can exchange into different currencies and they can cash in and out from that wallet with any mobile money number in East Africa. So looking forward to expanding into new countries and services sometime soon. But that's where we started and really did start with that mission of refugees, migrants, expanded into cross-border traders. And then with COVID, we've seen the need for these types of digital cross-border services across basically all markets.
Okay, well, that last point is interesting, and we'll get back to that. Um, okay. So, worldwide refugees and migrants, big issue. In fact, I'm seeing more and more companies start up more around sort of the migrant worker, banking issues with helping them get paid, et cetera. But you're focusing on refugees, which is kind of what caught my attention initially. What led you to this as a challenge, and then I'd like to get into sort of the mission versus commercial issue of is a mission driven business also a scalable business and a business that investors will find attractive. So talk about sort of the original impetus for this, and then why you think it's a business.
Well, hopefully there is no verses in that
Right.
sentence. Hopefully it's
Yeah.
an impact driven business and a scalable business. But to get back into the story, the background of Leaf, that's a lot of my personal background. It's a passion of mine, and I've been in and around refugee communities in the U.S. for about the last 15 years. So have seen firsthand how this plays out when you have a normal person in society who all of a sudden is forced to leave their assets, their money, their goods, their belongings, their family networks behind and go. And after seeing how people can get stuck in the cycle of poverty, it's just become very obvious to me that as much as I would love to support refugees with healthcare and education and everything else that they need, oftentimes the underlying need there is access to finance or just to be able to bring the money that they had with them when they go to a new country. So the backstory of Leaf as a business is that my co-founder Nat Robinson and I got paired on a pitch competition, business plan competition called the Holt Prize while we were in graduate school at Vanderbilt University. I was getting my MBA, Nat was getting his law degree, and we started digging into the refugee crisis and just saw how much of an opportunity is there. As you said, some businesses have started to look into this as a viable market, but most of the time, once you apply that label to someone, they're all of a sudden not perceived as a customer or a consumer anymore that has willingness to pay, that has money behind them. And so
You mean the
what we
label
found.
refugee, to be clear?
Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep. And so we saw that there's a significant opportunity, especially for people that either were previously banked or are bankable. And so after a while, we started digging into this idea of a blockchain based financial services platform for people moving across borders. And then that's when we started to see, as we started digging into the market, how many customer segments this actually applies to.
Okay. So yeah, I'd love to get into in a bit sort of where this extends into beyond sort of your original concept. But are there misconceptions about the financial wherewithal or the financial resources that refugees have? I mean, is there a set of misconceptions that you're sort of working off of as you build this
Absolutely.
business?
Well, and I appreciate you just calling it out for what it is. Many people will tiptoe around it, and eventually we get to the point where we say, "Hey, banks will not serve refugees generally as a policy." This
Right.
has been formalized in a lot of different ways, but it is often based on an underlying set of assumptions, which is that refugees don't have money and they don't have willingness to pay and they don't have identity documentation. Now, of course, all of those assumptions do have a kernel of truth in them, as most assumptions usually do. There are many refugees who face those issues, but refugees are a very, very diverse group, and there is a spectrum of people included under that broad label. There are
Mhm.
about 80 million displaced people, forcibly displaced people in the world today. It's about 1% of the world's population. And as you can imagine, if you took a random sampling of people across the world and pulled 1%, you'd have all sorts of people in there. And
Right.
so the estimate is the banks are missing out on actually about 40% of the bankable markets in the countries that we operate in. And so a lot of those people are refugees or migrants, cross-border traders, people that fall into our target customer segments. And so we've done a lot of work finding out what the financial needs of refugees actually are, not just relying on a basis of academic and NGO research that sometimes doesn't show the commercial sector lens on that,
Mhm.
but have really dug into doing our own, and then have built a product around this idea of offering affordable, accessible, convenient cross-border financial services to people who may or may not be device enabled with a smartphone.
Okay. All right. So, is this, and your definition of refugees, is that internal refugees,
It's a
migrant?
broad one. I'll
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that
Talk about
we're
that
pretty
just so we're
inclusive.
clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, there's no checkbox on our platform that says, "Are you a refugee?" We believe that part of serving people with dignity is
Mhm.
treating them like a customer who has choice, and that we need to earn their choice every day with the services that we provide.
Mhm. So, is there an inference, basically, based on certain circumstances? So it's not are you or aren't you a refugee, but do you face these certain circumstances like you're?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And as I said, there are a lot of people on Leaf's platform today. We've got about 5,000 customers right now in East Africa that are not refugees, but
Hmm.
for one circumstance or another, whether they're a small business owner, they're having trouble getting paid by their clients, or
Yeah.
whether they're a border trader who needs to transact across countries and currencies, we've got a lot of people on the platform.
Okay. Well, since I was direct with the previous question, I'll be direct with this one. Is the refugee label ultimately unhelpful to expanding the business? Can you talk about serving that community without calling it refugees? Is that name impairing
Yeah,
it in any way?
it's a very interesting question, and one again that I appreciate the directness. So it's been interesting. I think that the refugee the refugee story definitely helps attract interest and sometimes grant capital,
Hmm.
but it also can serve as a deterrent to certain forms of investment. So I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that all VCs are turned off by that, but it definitely comes with a certain stigma to some. One
Hmm.
of the things that we've been really passionate about from the beginning is making sure that we get the right people on our cap table, the right people on our board. And so finding investors that have an appetite for not just a comfort level with, but an appetite for working in emerging markets with a population that is generally overlooked and underestimated is very important to us. And so we've got the blockchain side that comes with its own risk. We've got the
Right.
refugee side.
Hmm.
And so it's, the storytelling aspect and making sure that we market ourselves appropriately, not just in terms of what we do, but who we are, is very important to us.
Okay. So talk about who has. So I can see like yeah, just a you know, very sort of commercially driven VC maybe being a little wary of that, but I can also see like a major like billionaire who wants to invest his money in something that's mission driven being very I could see a wide spectrum of investors, both being excited and perhaps wary of this. But talk about who has can you talk about who has invested and what their profile is, or what can you share about that?
Sure. So we've raised a mix of capital,
Hmm.
everything from accelerator programs, grants, government agencies, investor capital, and so it's all over the board. Some of that is having to get creative during COVID, quite honestly,
Sure, sure.
but it's worked out for us. We've been very thankful to do as well as we have during that time, and
Hmm.
with all those struggles. So yeah, I think one of the things that's been really interesting to us is that a lot of the blockchain and crypto investors don't seem to care as much about the refugee label or stigma. For them, it's all about how can we increase network activity? How can we get blockchain into spaces that it hasn't been so far? And places like Africa that have high mobile penetration and currently an untapped market for these types of services are really lucrative.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with some big deals on the continent within the last year, even during COVID. And so that's been encouraging to us to see that there are tech VCs out there that are on the cutting edge of the technology itself that really are fine with this market as well. And so that's been interesting to see. But I think for us, we do tend to do pretty well on grants. So we just won a grant through the Stellar Seed Community Fund, which is the blockchain that we're currently based on. And so, anything like that is helpful to us in addition to, your traditional raising of a round.
Okay. So I wanted to get to the blockchain aspect of this because it's actually very, very important. And particularly for the continent. I know DeFi is a big topic of conversation now. There's a lot of talk about just globally, but also how that might be a really transformational in Africa. But talk about how blockchain kind of changes the game for financial inclusion. Could you kind of give us a little primer on that?
Well, again, it's the story and it's the reality, right? So you hear a lot of people talk about how blockchain is going to change the world and how it's going to change Africa in particular. And all of that has the potential to be true.
Yeah.
And none of that matters day to day if you're not out there doing it. Right. And so we are, I am so proud that we are one of the few really that is out there doing it every day. You see, this is Kigali, Rwanda behind me. And we're live in 3 countries in East Africa and adding more within the coming months. And so I think that blockchain, when applied correctly, has significant potential to impact lives all over the continent. But the most important thing is that it be regulatory compliant, or in each country that the company is operating in, and then also that it be accessible. So there need to be on and off ramps in order for this thing to work. You can't just hold an asset in theory and have it mean something to your daily life, especially if you've sacrificed to get the asset there. A lot of people don't have those long-term growth opportunities for their funds like we might in the US and Europe. So that's those are 2 things that we've really focused on, is taking a pretty conservative regulatory approach. We use stable coins that are fiat pegged and fiat backed so that we're not introducing volatility into the mix or putting our customers at risk. And then we also have integrated with the local domestic payment system. It's ubiquitous, called mobile money, offered through the telcos in East Africa, so that you can pay in and pay out of our wallet with any phone number. The other person sending or receiving funds doesn't even have to have a Leaf account. So again, trying to make that as accessible as possible to people in their daily lives on technology that they already have and trust.
So your users, doesn't matter to them, or they don't care whether it's built on blockchain or any other.
Not at all. And we see that as a big. I know there are many people, many people in Africa who are interested in blockchain, not saying that there aren't crypto enthusiasts all over the continent. But our users don't tend to care about how it works. They just want to know that it's reliable and it does work.
Okay. So you mentioned regulatory, and then obviously the using stable coins to about volatility is an interesting point as we're speaking. It's been a bit, the crypto market crashed, in the last few days. Does it impact you at all? How does that impact you?
Thankfully not. Yeah, it doesn't impact our customers.
Right.
There's a small minimum reserve that we keep of crypto just to make things easier behind the scenes, but not really. Thankfully, minimal impact on us.
But I guess more in terms, my view is that, it's markets have bear and bull markets, and exactly. That's something you just deal with. But I don't know if there's any concern about the sort of confidence in crypto as a future platform for making all these things happen, or whether investors will shy away from crypto at this point.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. There are certainly crypto skeptics that are using this as an opportunity to say, right, hey, we knew the bottom would fall out. And I don't know that the bottom has totally fallen out. I think we've seen a significant leak in there, but I'm hoping that that'll be repaired and it'll bounce back soon. So I tend to agree with you on the market perspective. On the investor side, there are a lot of investors who have made a lot of money over the last 6 months, just by holding and investing in crypto. And so it was interesting, right up until last week or the week before, we were hearing things like, there are a lot of funds out there trying to deploy capital quickly because they want to get this out there before an event like last week happens. And so still waiting to see the ramifications of that. I think everybody's being a little bit slow to do anything or to react in order not to cause further fallout. But I'm confident that it will come back.
Okay. Well, let's pivot to kind of some other aspects of your business, because our core focus is tech for SMEs in Africa, Middle East. So obviously the refugee angle is very interesting, I think, just as a sort of foundation and what kind of this business is going. But you have you you also work with like very micro SMEs and traders that have to deal with cross-border payments. I thought it was interesting some of the challenges they face just in handling cash and how you're addressing some of those issues. So talk about kind of how you help these sort of very small traders, with some of their challenges.
Absolutely. Well, and that's, I think, again, an overlooked market that there's not a whole lot of research out there. People don't really understand the mechanics of it or the unit economics, how people are going about it today. And so that's an area where we've really gone in deep to support this group. Estimates are that about 40% of people on the continent rely on cross-border trade for income in some way. So that's about 500 million people. But most of that is in the informal sector. So these are people that are buying goods in one country, traveling across the border on foot, selling them in another country, getting cash, and then traveling back with cash. And that proves very dangerous because not only are they carrying large amounts of cash, but they're crossing a few times a week. And so they're known to the border guards and easily taken advantage of on the road, at the border point, anywhere in between. And there aren't digital solutions for these people. And so that's where we've really stepped in to say, again, can Leaf be the convenient, affordable solution for getting money across the border digitally so that you're not facing that physical security risk of carrying cash, and then also making sure that it's very transparent on things like foreign exchange rates that provide a significant barrier to conducting business for people who don't have access to information. We've seen so far that this is an absolute game changer in how somebody conducts their business. Usually these traders are very intelligent. They know their unit economics down to the penny equivalent, and they're looking for anything that will help them do business faster and cheaper. And so we've been able to step in with Leaf and provide those services. So not only are they paying their suppliers on the other side of the border, oftentimes in a different currency, but they can also do a direct pull request from their customers, even domestically, around Kigali or wherever else, so that the customer doesn't have to, send them the money, figure out how to do that on the local payment system, but the merchant can just do that directly from Leaf, even if the customer themselves doesn't have a Leaf account.
Okay. So these are people who are, they're they're buying agricultural products or buying raw materials or whatever it is.
Maize, flour,
Yes.
yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're subject both to robbery and corruption, I guess, are the two things that are threatening their cash.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a concern that if they stop carrying the cash, that the people who are expecting these payments will? Have you thought that angle of it through?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we have dug into, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've heard is that basically the amounts are so small, and the hassle of getting money from somebody who doesn't have cash on them is not worth it to border guards or whoever may be enforcing that formal penalty or whatever we're going to call it. And so basically they'll just go on to the next person. And unfortunately, they're likely to get it from them.
Yeah. Okay, so talk about the barriers to adoption of your product. Let's focus on the business side because, again, that's more of our focus, but maybe you can talk about it more broadly. Typically, there's either physical barriers like having the right device, cost barriers, psychological barriers. Talk about what is your competition a different habit? Just talk about what you have to overcome in order to get greater adoption.
I think any new product in emerging markets, but definitely within East Africa, the number one or the first barrier we're going to face, I'll say, is trust. And we get that question all the time. How are you going to generate trust within refugee communities? Sorry, there's construction going on around me, so you might get a bit of Kigali construction. But we get this question a lot. How are you going to generate trust within refugee communities or trader communities or difficult to reach communities broadly? And that's where we've been able to rely on very strong existing word of mouth networks. This is something that we identified even before we built the product. It was one of the reasons that we wanted to serve this market, because if you can tap into those, these communities are extremely tight and they talk all the time. And so if you can get in, the growth patterns actually mimic digital viral growth patterns. And so we've been successful with that so far, but layering in incentives like referral bonuses to grow the network, making sure that we have support available 24/7, because people still definitely have a preference for in-person high-touch communication. And so the phone is still the number one way that people reach out to us, which if you're pitching a VC, just say in the Bay Area, and you say, well, yeah, I'm going to scale my business based on customer support, phone-based and in person, not exactly the best strategy, but it's realistic with what we've seen so far. And so we're educating our customers as they come along the journey with us, that to be comfortable with more digital support. But there's definitely a journey there. And so trust is a big one on the competition, because you brought that up. I'd say biggest competition is just status quo, carrying cash. There are fragments or pieces of our service that are touched by other players in the landscape. So, we get asked about banks and mobile money a lot. And the short answer is they're both domestic solutions primarily. And so even if you've got a mobile money account, you can't really send across borders. It's not meant for storing large amounts of money over time. It's still quite expensive sending peer to peer. And so we're a big fan of mobile money systems. We've built on top of them. Every transaction into the Leaf wallet requires coming through a mobile money account. So definitely not taking away from those businesses, but I think it's more a game of just differentiating ourselves and explaining succinctly to customers, investors, and partners how and why we're different and why this is a game changer in our customers' lives.
Okay. So what are your plans in the near term for raising more capital? Have you done a formal A round, or are you still
not to this point? Yeah, we were raising right before COVID, had a round put together, and then it fell apart first week of April of 2020. So name of the game during that time was really just survive and help with other funds. And we've been very thankful that we've been able to do that through the Stellar Grant. We got a grant from the National Science Foundation in the US. Through their SBIR program. And so, have done well on that. But yes, I think we're looking forward to getting back out there and doing
because all that you just described is what gets a business, up and running. But it's to sustain a business, you're going to need more, obviously. And I imagine the environment is improving in terms of being post-COVID, but there's a lot of payment solutions out there. And I don't know if that's your biggest challenge with raising money, or if it's the nature of what you're doing. I'm not sure how you would describe the environment right now for raising money.
I think it's improving, definitely, as you mentioned, getting further outside of COVID, but then also just Africa being able to attract more capital. I think
have a couple of unicorns now to point to, and right.
A couple, yes, which is very exciting. Yeah. And I think, network effect, we all grow through those. It's positive. So very, very excited for those, and to see more investment capital coming to the continent. I think there's still significant disparities when you look at Native founders, when you look at female founders. And so still a lot of structural challenges with that. In addition to there are a lot of payment providers in Africa comment. And so, we try to differentiate by not just pointing to the market and technology, we're the first blockchain-based financial service for people without smartphones. That's exciting, but really on the ground, day to day, what is the difference that we're making, and how are we going to outpace and outgrow everybody else who's in this space?
Yeah. Back to blockchain very quickly. What is your perspective on, are you of the view that blockchain is the answer to everything? I mean, kind of put in perspective how important it's going to be and how dominant it will be over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of the fintech market. It was around, small consumer, small business.
Well, and that last clause is key, right? Fintech, small consumers, small businesses. There is no blanket answer for how blockchain will shape the world, at least not coming from me. I have one opinion.
I wanted to ask a narrower question.
Yeah. And I think, so my professional background before Leaf, I'm a data architect, database designer. So I love going deep on these things. And I would say that, it's all about the use case and the technical fit. So if people can identify a strong use case, a need that needs to be solved, then at this point, there is probably a blockchain out there that will assist in doing that within the fintech space. Thankfully, we've got so many solutions, so many protocols out there now that are designed to facilitate different things. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes commonplace to at least look for a blockchain protocol that will aid and help in any new fintech. But I also don't think that every new fintech needs to have a blockchain component. At its best, it is a component of the system, maybe even a foundational component, but it's never, for no fintech company is it the end all be all solution. And so I think it's really about, or the success is about being able to determine where it fits within the tech stack, what it does well, how it can aid your business, and how potentially it can help with the fundraising story or partnership development, business development, depending on the landscape that you're in.
Okay. All right. Last question is, how are things in Kigali in terms of doing business, opening up post-COVID? Are you working from home or in an office? How do you organize your company sort of in the post-COVID world? Just talk about doing business now and how it's changing and opening up.
Well, I'll say from the start, Rwanda has been incredible in its response to COVID, very strong response from the very beginning. And so 100% mask mandate, curfew still, but that's kept rates low and people are safe. And that's really all you can ask for. And so, I'm so thankful that our customer base and our partners and, everybody around our staff hasn't been more affected than they have. And so that's the first thing. And then on the business opening side, I think the biggest impact at first was the border crossings. Those were closed for a long time, especially to the small cross-border traders. And so, those opening back up has been big, and they're still throttled, but life is definitely getting back to normal, at least on the Rwanda side, and more so in Kenya and Uganda with some little blips, for different spikes. But one thing that I think is definitely true is that people have become more comfortable with digital payments. And so there was a 400% increase in mobile money accounts, subscribers within Rwanda within the first 3 months after the start of COVID. And so, the idea of storing money on your phone, using a phone or any other type of technology to pay for things has become more commonplace, which has been a huge boost to our business because it does lower that trust barrier. And so that's been a big one. And then just the physical atmosphere, again, it feels very safe here, which I'm thankful for. And so we've been able to return to a lot of the in-person meetings. I'm working from home today, but, we're able to go out and do that, which is definitely not something to take for granted.
Great. Okay, last question is, what is your plans for geographic expansion? Is this business by its nature an African business, or could it be an international business? How do you think about that?
So there's a reason that the name is Leaf Global Fintech, and we very much envision ourselves as a global company. So started in East Africa because of the proximity to some different conflict zones and the high mobile money penetration and comfort with some of those digital payments, but by no means exclusive to this area. And so we started with the countries that I mentioned. We're expanding hopefully soon into Tanzania, DRC, Congo, some others around the region branching out, but then also working on efforts to be able to cash in from Europe and to be able to do business in Latin America, where you see a lot of the same migration problems, financial services problems across borders, and no great solutions to fix those today. So very, very excited about that. We'll keep you up to date as we get there and as we add on to the product base as well.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. So I really appreciate you filling us in on Leaf Global and the problems you're trying to solve. And it's very exciting. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.